Hey there, welcome to AP Macroeconomics. I'm Mr. Sanabria, and today's topic is foreign exchange, also known as FOREX. Okay, and what we're really talking about here is currency markets. So we just wrapped up talking about supply and demand, and it may seem like a big deviation to go straight into something that seems totally different, which is international in nature. It's currency exchanges, but what we're going to find is that Forex is something that we can use supply and demand to explain. And so the purpose of me going straight to something that is really about international economics right now is that we just learned supply and demand, and so we're going to reinforce everything that we've learned about supply and demand by applying it to a macroeconomic concept. So in thinking about this, let's go ahead and make sure we understand that supply and demand is microeconomic in nature. Okay, supply and demand is microeconomics. We're studying the behavior in a single market. We talk a lot about the market for tacos, but we could talk about the market for almost anything that has a price, right? So the supply and demand of shirts, the supply and demand of dry erase markers, the supply and demand of food, the supply and demand of loans and bonds, okay? Getting into financial assets, something we're going to do much later in the course. So we can talk about the supply and demand of anything, which makes it a microeconomic topic. Forex is a macroeconomic topic, okay? Because Forex is about the value of your nation's currency compared to other nations' currencies, okay? So we're talking about something at the national level, and what we're going to find as we move through this discussion on foreign exchange markets is that the ultimate implication or result of a change in the value of your currency versus another nation's currency is that it's going to have an effect on your imports and exports. Something that we call net exports, and we'll be talking about a lot in the future. So we're going to go ahead and first begin by learning a little bit of the vocabulary that we're going to need to know in order to have a discussion of Forex. So first off, foreign exchange or Forex or currency exchange is the buying and selling of currency. So what the first thing we need to do is to have an understanding that when you spend money in another country, you first have to buy that currency in a very real way. So let me go ahead and just tell a story to illustrate this. Let's say that I'm on vacation and I'm in France, okay? And I'm having a great time, and I stop at a coffee shop and I go to buy a small coffee, okay, with cream, un café crème, as I would say if I were in France. What I would do is pay them in euros, right? Because I could have a $100 bill in my pocket, and they wouldn't take that. Well, actually, the $100 bill is universally valuable, and they probably would take it, right? But what would they do? They would actually go straight to their bank, and they would exchange that $100 bill for euros, right? Because ultimately, what I need to pay in France with is euros. Why? Because that's what they spend in France. So if I had $3, they wouldn't want my $3. They would want 2 or 3 euros for this cup of coffee. Okay? And this is a very real thing, and that's what the purpose of this story is. They want euros because euros are the thing that they can spend. And what's true about money in general is that you don't want money, you want what money can get you. And dollars aren't the thing that's going to get you stuff in Europe. Euros are. And so the first thing I have to do when I get to the airport, if I know that I'm going to want to buy stuff, and if I get off the plane in France, I know I'm going to want to buy stuff, I have to go to the exchange counter and I have to literally purchase euros. So I will purchase euros using dollars. I will buy euros as if it were a good, as if it were something like stamps or breakfast tacos. Okay, I have to pay a certain amount of money and get a certain amount of euros. Okay, so I spend some dollars, I get some euros. What I want us all to think about and hold in our minds is that this is a very real purchase that actually happens. And it's easy to make sense of if you think about you getting off a plane, going to the exchange counter, giving them, say, a $20 bill, and then giving you something like 13 euros. You can understand, I just purchased that. Let's pretend like I'm Apple Computer, and I'm going to import just 3 tons of microchips from some other country. Okay? Can I pay them in dollars? The answer is no. It's no different. This transaction is no different. So if I am Apple Computer and I need to import some part to make the thing that I need, I first have to purchase the currency of that country using dollars, and then I can use that country's currency to pay for the thing. Okay? So it's not any more complicated. Let's say that I get on eBay and I want to buy one of these manga graphic novels, right? The comic books. Well, if I get it from Japan, I don't actually buy it with $15. The first thing that happens in a very real way, this isn't notional, this isn't like pretend, this actually is happening all the time. The first thing that happens is that my bank purchases the equivalent amount of yen for the $15 purchase, and then uses that yen to purchase that comic book. All of this happens behind the scenes, and you see evidence of it with those currency exchange fees that you might notice come up on your account statement if you make a foreign purchase. Okay? So, understanding straight away that this is happening in the background is the key to understanding Forex. So, let's go ahead and continue. Alright, and I've just given an example here. In order to purchase a souvenir in France, it is first necessary for Americans to sell their dollars and buy euros. Kind of what we were talking about. The exchange rate, okay, so this is the next kind of bit of vocabulary we want to learn. The exchange rate is determined in the foreign exchange markets or the foreign currency markets. Okay, and the exchange rate is how many of or how much of one currency you get for another. So here's my example. In the UK, the exchange rate for the British pound is about $1.78. Okay, so this is the US dollar versus the pound. And what this is telling us is that it would take me $1.78 to buy 1 British pound. Okay. So the exchange rate is the cost of purchasing a foreign currency. What makes that change? Why is the price of a currency or the exchange rate what it is? Well, we just learned all about supply and demand. And each pair of currencies create their own market because euros can buy dollars and dollars can buy euros, or dollars can buy British pounds, or British pounds can buy dollars, right? We've got these individual markets. And where do prices come from? Prices come from supply and demand. So exchange rates are a function of the supply and the demand for currencies. So what we really want to drill into is what would make the people in Britain demand more dollars than they currently are? Or what would make the people in the United States demand more British pounds than we currently are? What would cause a change in the demand for either currency? An increase in the supply of a currency will decrease the exchange rate of a currency, right? If there's more of it, it will be less expensive to purchase. A decrease in the supply of a currency will increase the exchange rate of the currency. I'm going to go ahead and move myself up here. An increase in the demand for a currency will increase the exchange rate of the currency, and a decrease in demand of currency will decrease the exchange rate of the currency. You can imagine, and we are about to draw this, this is just supply and demand. Instead of price and quantity, we have exchange rate and quantity. But everything else is exactly the same. This is a supply and demand graph. The market happens to be one type of money purchasing another type of money. So let's talk about these two terms, appreciation and depreciation. Appreciation of a currency is when the exchange rate increases or the price of that currency goes up relative to the other currency. And so instead of just saying, like we do in supply and demand, that price went up, we would say that appreciation occurred. And depreciation is the same thing, right? Except the price is going down. So if the price of a currency or the exchange rate between two currencies decreases, then depreciation occurred. And we commonly think about the terms appreciation and depreciation. It's probably not the first time you've heard these. If you have a house and the value of the house has gone up, then you would say the house has appreciated in value, right? If you have a car and the more miles you put on it, the less you could sell it for, you would probably recognize that as the car has depreciated in value, right? So these are pretty straightforward terms, probably something that you can already have in your mind and not be too surprised by. So now what we want to do is graph this, because I think that the pictures here are going to be worth 1,000 words. All right, so now let's go ahead and graph this. And I've already told you that supply and demand is the graph we're going to use to talk about the price of currencies relative to each other, right? Or we now know that that is called the exchange rate of currencies. So what we're going to do is, first, we're going to take a positive quadrant here, and we're going to build the supply and demand graph of a currency. So let's just start with the dollar. So there's our dollar. And if we're going to draw supply and demand, then what we know we need is price and quantity, right? Well, let's go ahead and put quantity here, and you just can put a Q because you've already established this is supply and demand of a dollar. So this is literally the quantity of dollars. The quantity of dollars that exist in the market. Okay? And we need to have the price of dollars, right? Which is a weird thing to think about, but it's the price of dollars as they're purchased by whatever other currency. So we don't just talk about the price of money, we have a specific word for it, and that is exchange rate. So instead of P in Q, you put an E up here. That's for exchange rate. Okay? And then what must be here, and you have to have this will not be a FOREX graph until you do this. I want to see the exchange rate written out mathematically, which is written like this. It is whatever other currency, and we'll call it the euro for now. We'll just use the euro a lot. Okay, that's the symbol for the euro. In fact, that's a really ugly symbol for the euro. That's a little better. Okay, we've got euros over dollars. I need you to remember right now that whatever graph or whichever currency you're graphing, in this case dollars, it's on the denominator of this phrase, this mathematical phrase, euros over dollars, and that needs to be there. Okay, so right now we're graphing the currency exchange of euros and dollars. Then it's just a supply and demand graph. The supply of dollars, the demand of dollars. Okay, this is a supply and demand of dollars. But when we do this, we're actually not just going to graph the dollar market, we're going to graph both. And this is what our FOREX graphing is going to look like. We've got two supply and demand graphs that are going to be side by side. So on your notes, go ahead and draw both of these, and I want you to try and do this on your own. Remembering how we just drew the dollar market, I want you to draw the dollar market again right here, and then I want you to draw the euro market right next to it, and let's see how you do on this. Your graph should look like this. Okay, so first you've got the dollar market, you've got your price of dollars, which is exchange rate, and quantity. You've got the euros over dollars, which is another way of phrasing the exchange rate, and I need to see it. That's got to be there. And then supply and demand, and they're labeled. Next to it, you've got the euro market, and you've got exchange rate and quantity. You've got the kind of the mathematical phrasing of that, which is dollars over euros, because remember, euros is the market we're graphing. It's in the denominator, and the supply and the demand. So now what I want to do is introduce you to what we're going to call the 2 rules of graphing Forex. Okay, the 2 rules of graphing Forex. Now, what we start with is proper graphing. You start here. This is what I would call the status quo, right? This just represents the currencies as they currently are. And I would say that these 2 rules, what they really apply to is shifting supply and demand. Because the reason we draw supply and demand is really so that we can shift supply and demand, and we can recognize why price changes occur. Well, what we're going to do is shift supply and demand of currencies and understand why exchange rate changes occur, which is literally the same thing. So the first rule is that you are going to shift the opposite curves. Rule number 1 is you want to shift the opposite curves. And what I mean to say is if I shift demand on one graph, I'm going to shift supply on the other. Okay? If I shift demand on one graph, I shift supply on the other. If I shift supply on one graph, I shift demand on the other. Okay? So we're just going to shift the opposite curves. Rule number 2 is that both curves shift in the same direction. So rule number 1 establishes that, hey, if I shift the demand curve on one graph, I shift the supply curve on the other. Rule number 2 says they're going to both shift the same direction. So now I could say if I increase demand on one graph, I increase supply on the other, which makes perfect sense if we think about it real quick. If I increase the demand of dollars, then I have to meet that demand by increasing the supply of euros. Let's go ahead and see what it looks like on the graph. I'm going to use my red marker to show the shifts. So let's say, for whatever reason, and that's what we're going to talk about next time, so don't worry about why this happens, but let's just say that demand for dollars goes up. We already know what that looks like. That's a rightward shift of the demand curve. What our 2 rules tell us is first that supply is going to shift on this graph, and the second rule is that supply is going to increase. So the opposite curve moves the same direction. What's the result? Well, we have new equilibriums in both graphs. The first graph, the dollar graph, shows that the price of dollars went up, or the exchange rate of dollars went up. This is known as appreciation. The dollar just appreciated. For our euro graph, we can see that the exchange rate went down. That's known as depreciation. And that's where I want to stop today, okay? We know what foreign exchange markets are. We know why they exist. We know that when we graph Forex, we need to, instead of using price, we use exchange rate. We know that we need to have, we must have, it is wrong if it's not there. We've got to have dollars over euros or euros over dollars. And we know that the graph we're graphing is the denominator, okay? The currency we're graphing is the denominator. We know our 2 rules. If something causes an increase in the demand for dollars, then that's going to cause an increase in the supply of euros. Okay? And the result of those shifts is a higher exchange rate and a lower exchange rate for the other. Okay? So one will appreciate and the other will depreciate. And by definition, Okay, this is always true. If one currency appreciates, the other had to have depreciated, because this is all relative value. So next time what we're going to do is we're going to explore why these shifts would take place in the first place, otherwise known as the determinants of Forex markets. So until next time, happy studying.